Hey everybody, it's Irene, and I'm down in the shop again. And what I'm showing you today is how I make rings. Yeah, this is what happens when stuff gets mixed together. We have red brass 20 gauge, 3mm interior diameter. We have red brass 18 gauge, 3mm diameter, and we have brass 16 gauge, 3mm interior diameter. And you have to go through them one ring at a time and sort them out into the different sizes. And here's the different sizes. Yeah. Not my idea of a good time. I like to have the weird sizes on hand just because sometimes somebody brings you something to repair at an event and you're not going to cut rings at an event. You're just not. So, it's
That
nice
might have actually gotten a little mixed up in travel too.
Oh yeah, well one of the problems with these boxes is they really are not sealed completely. You'll see sometimes I will actually put a plastic storage sheet in there, because small rings like this will bounce over the top of this when the stuff flexes during travel. So you wind up with things like this where you've got silver and brass together. So I'm getting all of that sorted out, and everything is carefully marked. These are probably temporary because I don't like the fact that the lids will come off of these. But because that doesn't solve the problem if the lids are coming off again. But it's good to sort into.
I think I know what we're going to use to fix this in the future.
Well, I like the solid containers that are I can use things like this for bigger stuff like this, the beads. That's not a problem. They're not going anywhere. And some of these lids fit tighter than others. So this is great for sorting it into because I got my little cards and I've got my optivisor so I can see and all that other kind of stuff. But it is definitely on the tedious side.
I think we have one more travel box that has individual containers in it.
Well, let me tell you about those. They don't seal up tight. The lids don't latch down.
Oh no.
Yeah, they don't latch down completely. Now they're fine for the large rings like this. I could put these in there all day and it's not a problem. But most of these stupid little things that are designed for nuts and bolts and stuff are assuming that you've got something that's that big, so it's not going to fall out. And
I'm thinking one of the Bauer boxes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
Those things don't completely latch. They are expecting nuts and bolts and other stuff. And I would never put them in the big tray where you have to lift the entire lid, because if you dump that thing, every single thing in that top would go. So long term, I'm probably going to have. I'll probably use, for some of the smaller stuff, I'll probably use rubber bands and stuff like that. I have that jar that I'm trying to get the stickiness off the top of the sides of from where the label was. I like those because they're screw lids. They're not going anywhere. And I figured for some of the tiny things like this that I'm probably not going to recut because I have a ton of them already, I will probably just leave in something like this, but put them into a container that doesn't allow the lids to come off. But some of the bigger stuff that I will definitely have larger quantities, like, some of these bigger rings, I cut a gazillion at once. And, yeah, I have to just work out the details because, yeah, you'd be surprised at how porous is the only word I can come up with. A lot of these tool storage boxes are, because they don't expect it to be small. And some of the smaller storage boxes, they're too small. You can only put, you know, a couple of dozen in there. And if you need to have 500, it just won't fit. So yeah, it's been a constant battle ever since I started doing this to come up with solutions that would not wind up with mix-ups like this. And this is definitely from travel. The stuff bounces, and it does the same thing with the glass beads and the stone beads, which is why you'll see I have those. They're usually a thin mat made out of like a, I don't know, some sort of nasty plastic stuff. That things come wrapped up in it sometimes for storage when it's being shipped. And yeah, I use those in some of the, because if you put that here, then that will keep the majority of the stuff, because the small beads do the same thing. And you'll see me sitting there sorting beads sometimes for the same reason. And then you have the additional problem with beads that I'm cutting these things so I know exactly what size they are. A lot of times when you get inexpensive strands of beads that are pre-strung, they are actually a mix of sizes. You'll get, say, 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter in the same strand. And in order to have a really high-end looking necklace or bracelet, you need to sort those. So I actually sort those by size. Now, earlier I think Henry took some video of me counting rings and sorting them by size and stuff like that. But something else I need to do is make them. And it is a lot cheaper if you use a lot of rings to make your own rings, but you do have to have some equipment. The simplest way to do it is to simply take a stick or a piece of pipe or metal stock and wind the metal on there and then cut it with a saw. And that's what I'm going to do, except because I do this a lot, I have some specialist equipment. And I do remember showing you guys once before how you could do this the cheap and easy way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and zoom you in here a little bit here so you can watch how I actually wind the rings. So the first thing I need is a mandrel. Mandrels come in all different shapes and sizes. In this case, I happen to be using this one, and it will produce the size ring I need for an order. Now I have this is a chuck off a drill, you know, like the old-fashioned hand drills, and it's got a handle on it. So when I do this, it winds things around here. Now this particular piece of metal does not have a hole in it. Some of these do have a hole drilled in it. This one does. And right there. And what that means is I would be able to stick the the wire in there and then wind it from there. Because I don't have a hole in this particular one. Get this open a little bit wider first. There we go. Now it's locked in there. And I'm not going to run this whole thing. There should be a shorter piece of this around here somewhere. Couldn't find it. And I do need to make rings this afternoon. So, you can also use wood. This is just a wooden dowel, and you'll notice it says Steph's Loop in Loop Stick. That is from an old friend of mine years ago who wanted me to make a bunch of specific size loops for her for a class that she was teaching, which I did do, and I had to cut a certain size, so she gave me that, and I wound my stuff on there. Now, I'm just going to put this down, and I'm going to take a pair of pliers and bend this. And then I'm going to stick this in the holes between the various pieces. The chuck actually has kind of like gaps in between the jaws. Now, I'm doing this really slow to start with because I want to get it right. But once I get going, I can go quite quickly. And the goal is to have the rings completely next to one another. And I need to grab my gloves because doing this barehanded is never a great idea. Not only do you get the metal on your hands, which is what the black stripes are, but you can actually, if there's a burr or something on there, you could cut yourself. or some other unfun thing like that. So what I'm going to do, I am going to wind a whole stack of lengths of this coil on here. Now if I were cutting this completely by hand, I might actually not make this as long, but I'm not cutting it by hand. I do remember showing you guys how to cut this with a saw a while ago. Oops, I was not paying enough attention. I let this get away from me. That's a bad thing. Okay. Can't have overlaps or anything else on this. And it's best if everything can be really smooth and tight and neat next to one another. That is probably long enough. I can always make more than one of these coils. And then I need a cutter because obviously this wire needs to be cut off. And I've wound this very tightly, very tightly. Because I want it to be as accurate as possible in terms of being the size of that mandrel. And remember, the mandrel is just the thing I wound it on. Now that's right. This mandrel is lumpy on the ends. I forgot about that. So I actually need to not take it off that end, and I have to find the other one because this is just a kind of a beat up one. That's not cool. Now I'm going to verify that this is going to produce the size ring that I need. And it is, I think. If by some chance I wind up with rings that are just a little tiny bit off, I can do it again. I have lots of other mandrels, and my purpose right now is to do a quick run on this and show you guys how this works. So I'm going to cut this off that's sticking out because I don't want it to be in the way when I'm doing the next step. And see, it's just a coil. It's nice and tight, smooth. It's got a piece of wire sticking out at one end. And we're going to go over to the place where I have my special saw for cutting this. Okay, well, that took longer than I thought it was because it was hard to figure a place to put my camera. So, if you remember, it's been a while. This is the spiral of wire that I made. I'm going to take a wooden dowel. You can see it's greasy and chewed up and everything else, and that's just fine. Put it inside. What that is going to do is it's going to stabilize this coil when I cut it. This is not a how-to. I have never been taught to do it this way by any company, by the company that makes the tool or anything else. I figured this out myself because the tool was originally designed mostly for cutting a ring or two at a time. Now, this is I want to say the pro version. This is called the Jump Ringer Basic, and it's an older model. I don't even know if it's made anymore. The guy who owned the company died, and it took a while for somebody to pick up his stuff. I think that they're making the small stuff, and this would be the small size stuff. And you can see you can make some larger size rings, but what I need was not just larger rings. I needed more rings. So not just the ability to make bigger ones, but also to make a gazillion of them. Because if you're using a lot of them for doing any kind of work, it just builds up really fast. Now you can see this groove here will make teeny tiny little jump rings like you would use in a finely crafted necklace or something. And then you get up to big honking things like this. And what you do is I'm going to put, make sure that this is actually showing. Yes. I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to make sure that that tab, remember there's a little piece there, is kind of tucked down. I don't want it sticking up or anything. Put this on there and then screw this in place. This is just a little set screw. I don't normally use an Allen key for those who don't know, to do it. I just do it by finger. That's tight enough. If you would look at the sideways, you would see it has a bow to it. That's fine. The next thing I'm going to do is I am going to take some Burr Life. This is an old, well-used bottle. And I am going to dribble a little teeny bit of Burr Life right down the middle of this, where that groove is. Now, that groove is going to be where the blade cuts. This piece of equipment over here, let's see, it does show, yes, is where the blade is. It's inside this thing here to try and protect you from it. It is very sharp. It could do great damage if it were to contact your skin. It has little teeny tiny teeth. And they're brittle. So you want to make sure that you do everything you can to not break them. Now, the biggest thing you can do is be careful, obviously. This tool here, this part here, is going to slide into here, face down, and with the saw running, that saw blade, which is right here, is going to spin really fast and just slice those rings. Using Burr Life is the same thing if you do any other kind of metal work using cutting oil. When you're doing any kind of drilling of large, like if I were to use a large drill bit, you know, something like that, it's not a bad idea to grease it. That's all it is. It's a specific type of grease. This is already set up so that it's clamped to the desk, so it's not going anywhere. It's already been turned on so that all I have to do is step on the foot pedal on the floor, and it'll be magic. So what we do now, we turn this like this, make sure that the handle is in the right direction. There we go. I want it up so that my hands can be completely away from the blade. And I'm going to have to be quiet for a while because this is going to be noisy. Now I can feel when it has finished cutting. All of a sudden it changes the sound slightly and it's sliding easier. When I flip this upside down, you'll see there's pieces starting to come out of it. That was very awkward cutting because I normally position myself slightly differently in front of the saw. And I'm still trying to do all the safety things of being careful so as not to chop off fingers. But there's some that fell out. And I will unscrew this little screw here again. And this is now an entire pile of ready to use rings. There we go. See, that's what I mean by cutting a bunch at one time. The nice thing about these is the edges are cut nice and smooth. If there's any tiny bit of burr or anything like that, when I tumble them in the steel shot, that will be cleaned off. And tumbling them in the clean shot and the steel shot will also get the cutting oil off of them, the Burr Life. And that's all there is to it. And that's how I get mine. Rings. And I cut literally pounds of these things. So I'm going to go verify again that this is exactly the right size I need. It looks right to me, but I will use a ruler. And then I will go finish the cleaning process. And here we are. The tumbler is running. It has steel shot in it. This is what steel shot looks like, in case you're wondering. It's stainless steel, and it doesn't rust. And it burnishes the outside, which is sort of like rubbing the outside, plus it also has this stuff in it, which is green. It's a soapy sort of solution that takes off tarnish and makes it shiny. So we're going to leave this in here for at least a half an hour, probably longer. And when it's done, I'll show you how shiny things are. Okay, this is what it looks like when you dump out one of the containers. The steel shot. See how shiny those rings are? Nice and clean. Really does a great job on them. So now that those are cleaned up, I will put those through a sieve to get the individual rings out so I don't have to pick them out by hand. Then they'll get rinsed in some distilled water, and then they get put in here, which is a vibratory tumbler that has corn cob in it, which will dry all the rings without leaving any dots on them, because you can get water spots otherwise. And then we will be ready. Yay! Rings! We have rings! Rufus is bored. He says it's time to go up to the house. So we'll probably do that while we wait for this to dry, because waiting for rings to dry is kind of like watching paint dry, but not as exciting.